Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are going to do something a little bit, well, a little bit
A
different.
little closer to home, you might say.
Literally.
Right.
Yeah, usually we're looking at, these big abstract concepts or tech trends, but today we're zooming in on something so physical, so omnipresent that I think most of us have just stopped actually seeing it.
Right. It's the background radiation of modern life.
It is. It's arguably the most common back of the American dream. It's the set for, what, 90% of the sitcoms you grew up watching?
Oh, at least.
And there's a statistically very high probability that you are sitting inside one of these things right now while you listen to this.
Yeah.
We're talking about the single-family detached home.
The ubiquitous box. I know on the surface that sounds, well, a little mundane, doesn't it? It's just a house. It's four walls, a roof, maybe a driveway.
Yeah, what's there to talk about for an hour?
But when you actually dig into the source material we have today, which is this really fascinating stack covering sociology, architectural history, linguistics, and a frankly exhausting catalog of room types, it just reveals a much more complex story.
It really does. I went into this thinking, we were just going to talk about drywall, maybe some property taxes, mortgage rates, but this is really a history of privacy, isn't it? It's not about construction, it's about psychology.
It is. It's about a fundamental shift in how humans organize themselves socially. It's about how we decided, as a species, to stop living on top of each other and start building these little moats of air around our families.
So our mission today is to look past the curb appeal. We want to understand why we live this way and why the terminology, the words we use, create such massive confusion if you try to talk about real estate across the Atlantic.
Oh, the US versus UK thing is a minefield.
Right. And also what the future holds for this specific structure, because as we're going to see, the single-family detached home isn't just a pile of bricks, it's a statement.
It's a statement that says, I am separate. I mean, you take the high-level view. For the vast majority of human history, living in a detached box with just your immediate biological family was weird. It was an anomaly.
It wasn't the default setting.
Not at all. We moved from communal survival, living in clans, tribes, multi-generational clusters, to this intense, almost obsessive focus on individual privacy. And what's fascinating now is that we're at a point in the 21st century where that whole shift is being challenged again.
It feels like a full circle moment. But before we get to the future, we have to look at the source stack we've got. It's pretty comprehensive. We've got a breakdown of definitions.
The legal stuff, the zoning stuff.
Yeah. Then the regional terminologies, specifically that US versus UK and Commonwealth divide you mentioned, and a historical evolution that takes us from like pre-industrial times right up to the post-World War II boom.
And we also have an architectural breakdown. We're going to look at everything from the humble cottage all the way up to a palace. And we have this list of rooms that is honestly mind-boggling.
That list is my favorite part. I'm not kidding. There are rooms in there I didn't even know had names, and some that I have definitely decided I need to add to my dream house.
I think I know which ones you mean.
But before we get lost in the blueprints, I want to tease something that just jumped out at me immediately. There is a term in the sources for a specific type of house design that sounds absolutely ridiculous. It's called the snout house.
The snout house, yes. It sounds funny, almost like a cartoon character's house, but it describes a very real and often criticized phenomenon in modern suburban design. It's a perfect example of how our priorities have shifted over the last, 50 or 60 years.
I can't wait to unpack that. And on your end, you found some stuff about why living with your in-laws used to be basically the only way to survive.
That's right. We tend to think of the nuclear family, mom, dad, kids, as the traditional family, right? But historically speaking, that's not it. Living with your parents and your spouse's parents was the default setting for centuries. The fact that we stopped doing that is actually the strange part of the timeline.
Okay, let's dive in. Let's start with the basics. Section 1, defining the box. What actually is a single-family detached home? Because I feel like I know it when I see it, but the legal definitions are surprisingly rigid.
They are. So if we look at the technical definition that's in our material, specifically citing folks like Statistics Canada and general zoning usage, it's a freestanding residential building. But there are these two key criteria that make it single-family and detached.
Right, so single-family seems obvious, but let's just clarify. It means it's occupied by one household.
Correct. So it excludes hotels, rooming houses, boarding houses, or anything designed for transient accommodation. It's for a family or, a single household unit to inhabit permanently.
But there's a little wiggle room there, isn't there?
There is, and it depends on where you live. Some jurisdictions will allow for a basement suite or what they call an accessory dwelling unit, like a granny flat over the garage.
Ah, carriage house.
Exactly. And that doesn't necessarily strip the house of its single-family label.
Yeah.
But broadly, the design intent is for one unit to control the entire structure.
Okay. And then we have the detached part. This seems like the critical distinction. This is where your motive error comes in.
This is the deal breaker. To be detached, you cannot share walls, period. You must be completely separated by open space on all four sides from any other structure.
So if you're touching the neighbor's house, even just by a garage wall or maybe a shared roof line,
Then you are not in a detached home. You might be in a semi-detached, a duplex, a townhouse, or a terrace house. But detached implies that you can walk all the way around your property without bumping into another building.
and that distinction is vital because it implies something else, right? It implies land.
That's a great point. The source notes that most single-family homes are built on lots that are larger than the structure itself. You aren't just buying the building, you are buying the empty space around it.
Which creates the yard in North American English.
Or the garden in British English. And that open space is just as much a part of the definition as the walls are. It's a buffer zone. It's a way of ensuring that your noise doesn't bleed into your neighbor's life.
And their cooking smells don't bleed into yours.
Exactly. It's architectural social distancing.
It's so interesting because that buffer zone is really inefficient if you think about it purely from like a resource perspective. We are heating 4 exposed walls instead of sharing 2 with a neighbor and saving energy.
Oh, massively inefficient.
But culturally, we place a huge premium on that inefficiency. We pay extra for the air gap.
We do. We pay for the autonomy. When you share a wall, you share a fate, to some degree.
You know?
If your neighbor has a leak, you might get a leak. If their kid takes up the drums,
You're listening to drum solos.
you're listening to the drums. The detached home is the architectural version of mind your own business.
Okay, so speaking of the structure sitting on the lot, we have to talk about the snout house. This term is hilarious to me, but the definition, when you visualize it, is actually kind of sad.
It is a derogatory term. It's used by architects and urban planners. A snout house is a specific layout where the attached garage creates this protruding snout,
So the garage is the nose of the house.
essentially. The definition is a house where the attached front entry garage sits closer to the street than the living quarters or the front door. So imagine walking down the street. You look at a house. What is the first thing you see? What's the dominant architectural feature?
In a snout house, it's the garage door, a big blank garage door.
Exactly. It's the door for the car, not the door for the humans. The human entrance is usually set back. Maybe it's in shadow or off to the side, an afterthought.
It's like the house is saying, the car lives here, and the people are just guests of the car.
It really emphasizes how the automobile shaped the single-family home, particularly in North America post-1950s. I mean, before the car became dominant, homes had front porches. The face of the house was designed to interact with the street, with pedestrians, with neighbors walking
No,
by.
it was social.
It was. As the car became the primary mode of transit, the garage became the primary entrance, both usually and functionally.
That's such a good point. If you drive into your garage, close the door behind you with a remote, and walk straight into your kitchen or your mudroom, you never actually interact with the outside world.
You don't.
If
And the snout house is the physical manifestation of that isolation. It dominates the lot. In many ways, the snout house is the ultimate expression of mid-century suburban design priorities. Privacy and mobility over, say, curb appeal or social connection.
It turns the neighborhood into a storage facility for vehicles rather than a community for people.
That's what the critics would say, yes.
It's a fascinating evolution. We went from big front porches where you'd sit and talk to neighbors to big garage doors that just shut the world out. Now, this brings us to a bit of a language barrier. Because while we're throwing around the term single-family home, if we were recording this in London or Manchester, people might be looking at us funny.
They absolutely would. The source explicitly states that the term single-family home is almost unknown in the United Kingdom, except maybe through internet exposure to U.S. media.
Really? So if I walk into a real estate office in London and say, "Hi, I'd like to see your available single-family homes," do they just stare at me blankly?
They might be confused for a sec. They'd figure it out. Of course, people live in houses there too. But the terminology and the mental classification are completely different. In the U.S., the real estate market classifies housing into single-family, multifamily, condo, and so on. It classifies based on the occupant unit.
Okay, so it's about who lives there and in the UK.
In the UK, The primary mental division is simply between houses and flats.
Flats being apartments.
Right. So in the UK, if you live in a structure that goes from the ground to the roof, you live in a house. It doesn't matter if it's attached to neighbors on both sides or not.
Yeah.
A row home, what they call a terraced house,
Hmm.
is a house. A semi-detached is a house.
So house is the big category.
Exactly. Within that house category, they then specify detached, semi-detached, or terraced. But they wouldn't say, I'm looking to buy a single-family home. They'd say, I'm looking for a detached house.
That's a subtle but really important difference. The U.S. term emphasizes the family, the social unit inside,
Right.
but the UK term emphasizes the structure, the brick and mortar separation.
That's a really astute observation.
Yeah.
And I think it speaks to how rare detached housing can be in denser European countries compared to the US or Canada. In America, the single-family home is the default mental image of a house. If you ask a child to draw a house, they draw a box with a triangle roof standing all by itself in a yard,
With a sun in the corner.
with a sun in the corner. In the UK, a child drawing a house could very likely draw one that's connected to another house.
The sources also list some other global variations that I found interesting. Canada seems to be a bridge between the two, which is
Wow.
usually the case with Canada.
Canada's interesting because it uses both. You'll hear single-family home in casual conversation, but the official census term, and you see this in legal and real estate documents, is single detached dwelling.
So it's very precise.
Very. It combines the American focus on the single unit with the British focus on the detached structure. It leaves no room for error.
And what about New Zealand? The source mentioned something there too.
Separate house.
Separate house. I like that. It's so literal. I am separate from you.
It cuts right to the chase, doesn't it?
Oh.
No ambiguity there. It reflects that colonial history of land abundance again, the cultural expectation of separation.
Okay, so we've defined the box and we know what to call it depending on where we are. But how did we get here? You mentioned earlier that this wasn't always the norm. Let's go back in time. Section 3. From the village to the suburb.
Right. To understand the single-family home, you really have to understand what it replaced. In pre-industrial societies, and we're talking about most of human history here, right up until just a couple of hundred years ago, most people lived in multifamily dwellings.
So were they like apartment buildings or...
Not necessarily vertical apartments like we have today. Think more of shared compounds or longhouses or cottages that were just packed with multiple generations of the same family. The source describes a very specific life cycle that was the norm for centuries. A child lived with their parents from birth until marriage.
Okay, that sounds normal enough so far.
But then when they got married, they didn't go out and, get a mortgage on a starter home. They generally moved in with the parents of the husband. That's called a patrilocal system, or less commonly, the parents of the wife, a matrilocal system.
Wait, so you get married and you immediately move in with your in-laws?
Yes.
Right.
And you stay there. You raise your kids there. You likely die there. The house is a continuous entity.
Wow. I mean, I love my in-laws. They're great people, but the idea of never having your own space, that sounds absolutely exhausting to the modern ear. What was the logic behind it?
It was all about survival and efficiency. The source outlines the logic perfectly. First, the grandparents were there to help raise the young children. You have built-in free childcare.
That makes a lot of sense.
Then the middle generation, the ones in their prime working years, could care for their own aging parents. It was this perfect closed loop of care. The young care for the old, and the old care for the very young.
Right. There was no social security, no nursing homes, no daycares. The house was the social safety net.
Exactly. And then there are the practicalities. Building a house is hard work. It takes a huge amount of resources and labor. Why build two when you can just add a room to one?
Sure.
And think about heating. In colder climates, heating is a massive resource drain. If you have to chop wood by hand to survive the winter, one central fire heating 12 people is far more efficient than 3 separate fires heating 4 people each.
So the idea of the nuclear family living alone, isolated in their own little box, that's the historical outlier.
It is the great historical outlier. It's a relatively recent invention, and it's tied directly to rising living standards, particularly in North America and the New World.
The New World shift.
Exactly. When settlers came to North America, the math just completely changed. Land was, for them, effectively limitless. In Europe, you had these close-knit villages because land was scarce and you needed to be near the fields you worked. In the New World, settlement patterns often involved large farms that were separated from neighbors by miles of wilderness.
So isolation was baked into the geography from the start?
Right. And the source suggests this produced a really deep-seated cultural preference for privacy and space. If you grew up in a homestead where your nearest neighbor was a mile away, the idea of sharing a wall with someone in a crowded city feels, well, it feels claustrophobic. It feels like a downgrade.
But then we had the Industrial Revolution, right? I mean, didn't that push everyone back together into cities?
It did, initially.
Yeah.
Industrialization and urbanization forced people into multi-story apartment blocks near the factories. We saw massive densification. Think of the tenements in New York or London in the 1800s. Horrible conditions, everyone packed in.
So it was a step back, in a way.
In many ways. But, and here is the big twist, in the New World, that trend of densification eventually halted and then dramatically reversed.
When did that happen?
Post-World War II.
The baby boom, of course.
The boom. And two specific technologies drove it, according to our text. The automobile and cheaper building and heating costs.
The car allowed you to leave the city for work, and cheap energy meant you could finally afford to heat a whole standalone box all by yourself.
Precisely. This combination led to mass suburbanization. We built millions and millions of single-family detached homes because, for the first time in history, the average family could afford to break that multi-generational pact. We could afford privacy.
And we outsourced all the functions of the multi-generational home.
We did. We outsourced childcare to schools and daycares. We outsourced elder care to nursing homes. And we bought the box.
It's interesting to look at the stats on this because it's not evenly distributed even within a single country. The source mentions a Canadian example from the 2006 census that really illustrates the difference between an old city and a new sprawl city.
It's a stark contrast. In Montreal, which is an older, denser, more European-style city in its layout.
Lots of walk-ups, right?
Exactly. Lots of duplexes and triplexes. In Montreal, only 7.5% of the population living within the city limits lived in single detached homes.
7.5%, that's tiny.
It is. Most people are in attached housing of some kind. Now compare that to Calgary, which is a much newer city built largely in the age of the automobile, a classic sprawling North American city.
Okay, what's the number there?
57.8%.
Whoa, so nearly 60% versus less than 8. That's a massive difference.
It shows that the single-family home isn't just a preference. It's a direct result of when and how a city was built. If the city grew up before the car was king, it's dense. If it grew up after the car, it's detached.
And culturally, this became tied to the American dream. The source explicitly links the image of the house with the white picket fence in the yard to this ideal. It became the ultimate symbol of success. If you made it, you got the detached box.
You got your piece of land.
But not all boxes are created equal, are they? This brings us to Section 4, the architecture of status. The source lists a whole hierarchy of house types, and honestly, the definitions are a lot messier than I expected.
They are. Language is tricky, and it changes from place to place. Let's start at the smaller scale. The cottage.
Now, when I hear cottage, I think of a vacation home. You know, a cottage on the lake, or maybe cheese.
In the U.S., the definition provided is actually quite specific. It typically refers to a house with 4 main rooms, 2 on either side of a central corridor.
Ah, very symmetrical.
Very. And commonly, there's a lean-to added to the back for the kitchen and laundry. It's a humble, functional design. Classic Americana.
But if you go to Australia?
The nuance shifts. In Australia, a cottage almost always implies a veranda across the front. It's all about that outdoor living space. It's a response to the heat.
And in the UK, what's a cottage there?
In the UK and Ireland, cottage is almost entirely about age and location. It refers to any small, old, specifically pre-World War I house in a rural or formerly rural location. The floor plan doesn't matter. If it's old, small, and in the country, it's a cottage.
So a new build in the countryside, even if it's small, is not a cottage.
Not a cottage, it's just a small house.
Okay, let's move to the one that confuses me the most. The bungalow.
Oh, the bungalow. This is a classic cross-Atlantic point of confusion.
In the U.S., a bungalow is what exactly?
In American English, the source describes it as a medium to large, freestanding house, usually on a generous block in the suburbs. It has a less formal floor plan than, say, a Victorian villa. It doesn't necessarily dictate the number of stories, though they're often low-slung, maybe 1.5 stories. Think arts and crafts style.
Right. But in the UK?
In British English, bungalow has a very, very strict definition. It is a single-story house, period. If it has a second floor, it is not a bungalow.
So no stairs?
No stairs to a second floor. And because land is so precious in the UK, single-story houses are actually quite rare and often sought after, especially by retirees. So a bungalow there is a very specific, somewhat unusual thing.
That's wild. I've definitely heard Americans refer to two-story houses as bungalows if they have that specific architectural style.
Exactly. The style defines it here, the height defines it there. Total disconnect.
All right, let's scale up. Let's get fancy. The villa.
Villa is a term with serious pedigree. It originates from Roman times, where it referred to a large country retreat for the wealthy.
Like a vacation home for a senator.
Precisely. Moving up to the Victorian era, a villa was a status signal. The source says it meant a house that was larger than the average by-law terraced house. It often had a double street frontage. It was a way of saying, I have money, and I don't live in a row house like the common folk.
And then we hit the top of the food chain, the mansion.
The mansion. The definition here isn't just big. It's about exceptional wealth, multiple stories, grand proportions. But the key differentiator mentioned in the source is really interesting. Staff.
Staff.
Yes. A true mansion is defined by being too large to be maintained by the owner alone. It implies the presence of servant quarters. You don't just live there. You manage a team there.
That makes a lot of sense. If you have 20 rooms, you're not vacuuming them yourself.
Or dusting the chandeliers. And speaking of rooms, the source lists some specific specialty rooms found in mansions that really paint a picture of how the other half lives.
Oh, I saw this list. It's fantastic. It lists library, conservatory, theater, greenhouse, infinity pool, bowling alley.
Don't forget the last one.
And a server room.
That made my tracks too.
It's such a modern, jarring addition to that list. You have the bowling alley, which feels very like mid-century Gilded Age rich.
Yeah.
And then the server room, which is very 21st century tech billionaire rich.
It shows how the definition of luxury evolves, doesn't it? It used to be about having a special room to grow exotic plants, the conservatory. Now it's about having a climate-controlled room to house your digital infrastructure.
And just to round out the top tier, above the mansion, we have the palace and the castle.
Which are pretty straightforward. Palaces are official residences for rulers or heads of state. And castles are defined by fortification, either real medieval ones or, architectural imitations of them.
Okay, I want to open the door and go inside. Section 5. Inside the walls. The source material provides an exhaustive list of rooms and spaces. And when I say exhaustive, I mean they listed everything from attic to wiring closet.
It's a tour of human domesticity over the centuries. It's fascinating.
I want to highlight some of the weirder or more interesting ones.
Yes.
Let's start with gender, because the list actually categorizes some spaces in a way that suggests a long history of separating men and women within the home.
It does. Under the category of living room variants, it lists the man cave.
Which we all know. The basement sanctuary with the leather couch and the neon beer sign.
The modern male retreat. But if you look at the historical counterparts listed right next to it, it gets really interesting. The list includes the gynecium.
The gynecium. I've never heard of that.
It's defined as a harem, or the women's quarters in ancient Greek or Roman houses. The part of the house where the women lived, separate from the men, and right next to that, it lists the andron, which was the men's quarters.
So the man cave isn't a new idea. It's an ancient one. We've just rebranded it.
It's a very old idea. The separation of domestic space by gender has incredibly deep roots. And even in more recent history, if you look at the private rooms list, we see the boudoir.
Which is traditionally a woman's private sitting room or dressing room.
And the cabinet, which was often a man's private study or retreat, a room for his collections or his work. We've always tried to carve out these gendered niches within the single-family box.
Let's talk about food. The list of kitchen-related rooms is a trip. It's not just kitchen and pantry.
No, it's a glimpse into the complexity of historical service in a large house. Today, we have a kitchen, maybe a walk-in pantry, if we're lucky.
But the list includes dirty kitchen versus kitchenette.
A dirty kitchen is interesting. It's usually a secondary kitchen where the messy, smelly cooking happens, often found in parts of Asia or in older grand estates, to keep the main kitchen pristine and ready for show.
Okay, that makes sense. But then we get to the really archaic service rooms, the buttery.
Which has nothing to do with butter. It was for storing butts of liquor, or casks, the domain of the butler.
Okay, then the scullery.
The scullery was for washing dishes and doing the dirty prep work, like gutting fish or peeling potatoes. The place for the scullery maid.
And then these two, which are my absolute favorites, the saucery and the spicery.
They're fantastic, aren't they?
I just love the idea that you needed a whole room dedicated to sauces. What even happens in a saucery?
Well, in a great medieval or Victorian house, you might need one. The saucery was specifically for the preparation of sauces and gravies, and the spicery was for storing spices, which, remember, were incredibly valuable. You wouldn't just leave saffron and cloves lying around in the scullery. They needed their own secure, dry room.
It really emphasizes the sheer scale of these operations. It wasn't just a home, it was a factory for feeding people.
And we've compressed all of that. In a modern single-family home, the refrigerator replaces the larder, the buttery, and the spicery. The dishwasher replaces the scullery.
We've collapsed the architecture into appliances.
That's a deep thought, but it's true. We replace rooms with machines.
There are also some really specific, unusual spaces listed that I had to look up. We have the keeping room versus the great room.
A keeping room is an older term. It's usually a room right next to the kitchen where the family would sleep or hang out during the winter because it was the warmest place in the house near the hearth. A great room is the modern version of that, a large, open-plan space combining the living room, dining room, and kitchen.
And under the general category of spaces, it lists the conversation pit.
A classic 1970s architectural feature. A sunken section of the living room lined with cushions.
Designed for conversation, I guess.
Theoretically. Mostly for spilling drinks and tripping over.
And the source mentions 3 types of cellars: root cellar, storm cellar, and wine cellar.
All underground storage, but for very different things. Potatoes, tornadoes, and Bordeaux. You don't want to mix those up.
And finally, under spaces, explicitly listed, which made me so happy, secret passage.
I love that this made the list. It's not just a trope from a mystery novel.
It validates every childhood dream I've ever had. If it's on the list, it's a legitimate room type. I can officially put it in my house plans.
It counts.
So we've toured the history, the structure, and the rooms, but we have to look forward. Section 6, the 21st Century Challenge. The source material ends with a section on modern trends, and it suggests that the reign of the single-family home might be facing some serious headwinds.
Significant headwinds. The source identifies 3 main conflicts that are challenging the dominance of this housing type, especially in North America.
Okay, what's conflict number 1?
A lack of affordable housing.
It's a simple supply and demand problem, right?
Pretty much. We ran out of cheap land near where the jobs are. The model of everyone gets a detached box on a big lot creates artificial scarcity. It drives up land costs, which drives up housing prices.
Conflict number 2.
Climate change. Specifically, the impacts of urban sprawl and our dependency on cars.
The snout house problem coming home to roost.
Exactly. Low-density housing requires more driving, which means more emissions. It requires more infrastructure per person, more roads, more pipes, and it uses more energy to heat and cool per person compared to denser housing. It is, from a climate perspective, very inefficient.
And the third conflict.
Concerns about racial and economic inequality. The source notes that single-family zoning has, in many cases, been used historically as a tool to exclude certain demographics.
How so?
By keeping housing costs artificially high and preventing the construction of multifamily units like apartment buildings, which are often more affordable, from being built in certain neighborhoods, it can create and perpetuate segregation.
So what is the response to all this? What are cities doing?
Well, according to the source, the policy response is a significant shift. It reports a trend towards cities increasingly abandoning single-family zoning.
Abandoning it entirely?
Yes, in some places. They are rezoning areas that were exclusively for single-family homes to allow for higher density. The source specifically cites California and Minneapolis in the reference titles as places that have made statewide or citywide changes. They're moving towards allowing duplexes, triplexes, or fourplexes on what used to be single-family lots.
So the very legal definition of the single-family lot is changing under our feet. It's becoming a multifamily lot, whether the neighbors who bought into the old idea like it or not.
That is the trend being reported. It's a direct reversal of that post-World War II suburban boom we talked about earlier. We are, by necessity, swinging back towards density.
It's so interesting. We started in the communal village, moved to the isolated suburb, and now, out of necessity, we might be turning the suburb back into a kind of village.
That is the cycle, yeah, a new kind of density.
So let's wrap this up. Let's try to synthesize this whole deep dive.
We started with a simple definition, a box, surrounded by air, for one family. We saw that this simple idea is actually a huge historical anomaly, made possible by a very specific moment in time when land was cheap and energy was abundant.
We learned that even the name is confusing. What's a single-family home here is just a detached house in the UK, and that small difference says a lot. We toured the Snout house and the mansion.
And we saw that as those core variables, the cost of land, the cost of energy, our social priorities. As those things change, the house itself is changing. The single-family detached home is an architectural expression of an era, and that era might be closing or at least evolving into something denser and more complex.
It really makes you look at your own walls differently, doesn't it?
It absolutely does.
So I want to leave you with a final thought today, something for you to mull over. We talked about that incredible list of rooms you can find in a house, particularly a mansion. The source lists server room right alongside bowling alley. It lists secret passage right alongside stairs. It lists saucery alongside kitchen.
Right, the old and the new all jumbled together.
Exactly. So here's my question for you listening. If our homes are defined by the rooms we choose to build in them, what does the inclusion of a server room, a room dedicated entirely to connecting us to the digital world, and the near total disappearance of the parlor, a room that was dedicated to sitting and talking with other people face to face, what does that say about the current state of the family unit?
That is the question, isn't it? We're trading physical connection space for digital connection space right inside our own homes.
Something to think about the next time you walk past your router. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.
See you next time.